Hello, 1301. I wanted to go over the Jane Tompkins questions. They look fairly difficult, but I know you're smart, and I think once you listen to me and read it, you'll start understanding more. Question number 1 says Tompkins' essay is divided into 3 parts. It starts out, she's a little girl in New York. She goes to a fair, falls in love with Native American culture. She loves Native American culture. She wants to be a princess. And then the second part, she breaks down her research and the different writers. First person account, third person account, and they're all different depending on the time and what the writer wants to convey. And then the third part of her essay is, I would maybe call the problem of history, what's the truth? The big word in there is called meta-discourse. If you want an example of that, if you're researching Native American history, which version is the truth? There's a concept that the winners write the history books. The vast majority of Native American history was written by white people in America. So if you're a Native American, do you believe that? The vast majority of African American history in the Western world was written by white people. Vast majority of Hispanic American literature, of Appalachian American literature was written by rich white people, New York Times or whatever. So if you're Native American, if you're African American, if you're Hispanic American, if you're Appalachian American, can you believe that history lesson from 1850 or 1950 or 2020, like alternative facts? So the second part of that question asks essentially, if you grow up to be a history teacher, a humanities professor, how do you teach history? If you're teaching Native American history, do you pick your textbook and you teach it the way that textbook reads? And you don't necessarily know the biography of the writer. So do you have to go back and tell, this is the white people version, this is the Native American version? You have to study 15 different books to get to the real truth. Or is it easier if you're teaching ninth graders to go with a good textbook that you picked? Maybe a modern one, maybe one from a scholarly press, a .edu. So question number 1, you're the professor, how do you teach Native American history? And it's pretty complicated. The best history teacher I ever had would dress up in the period pieces. He was an older man. He might not have got it right, but he gave it a shot, and he had fun, and he was open to many perspectives. The second question, which might be for the haters, asks, do Jane Tompkins's pieces of her essay fit together too nicely? It reads like she went to the library and picked up a book from 1950s writer. Native Americans are wild and they don't believe in God. They need us. And then she goes to the shelf from the 1980s, and the 1980s writer says the Native Americans didn't understand the fur trade. That's why their civilization fails. She picks up a 1960s text. Wouldn't it be cool to live in a teepee and smoke the peace pipe? And again, it reads in her article like everything fits together perfectly. And it would seem, per that question, that she strung those books together intentionally to make her point. She makes a good point that I agree with, but if you're a hater, maybe you say it fits together a little too nicely. So if you dislike the man, you want to sweat her for the way she wrote, maybe pick this question. Question number 3 says for you to tell your own story. And since I've been teaching Jane Tompkins, that's probably the most popular question. A lot of students talk about an essay maybe they wrote in 10th grade and 12th grade. Maybe they wrote at Odessa, where they did some superficial research on Native American history, and it said one thing: Christianity, fur trade, pick something. And then the more research they did, it didn't seem like there was an actual truth. So for number 3, I mean, I'll give you an example in a second. But number 3, you're writing a paper about research you did that troubled you or didn't seem true to you. If you want an example from my life, if I go back to a story I probably told in Rodriguez, the Civilian Conservation Corps. It's the 1930s. There's a depression. Roosevelt assembles the Conservation Corps. They make national parks for the people. It sounds really nice. New York Times, Charlottesville Daily Progress. It says, look, the workers got together. The government gave them jobs. We built national parks for the people. But I know as a hillbilly, 1932, my great aunt went to church on Sunday. Those same people burned my aunt's house down and threw all her stuff like in the yard. And she couldn't read or write. Her family lived there 200 years. But the agents of the government, the good Civilian Conservation Corps, took her land, burned her house down. And if you're doing a paper on that, what do you believe? If every article says civilian conservation is good, Civilian Conservation Corps, the government's good, but they did that to one of your relatives, how do you write that paper? So I would imagine if I were doing Tompkins, I might pick number 3. Question number 4 essentially asks, you're a seasoned Odessa College sophomore, and there's a new freshman, and the freshman went to the library to do her paper on Native American history, and there's 15 different versions of the truth. And her paper's due the next day, and she's struggling. What advice would you give her? We'll get to it in my next lecture, but Tompkins at the end of her article doesn't really give a solution. It's pessimistic in terms of what you do about the problem of history. If you went to the 1301 manual, it would say pick a book, pick a source that's modern 2020 from a reputable press, from a .org, a .edu. Probably a University of Texas press is more valid than something you read on the internet, on TMZ or whatever. So, but anyway, question number 4 asks you what advice, what writing strategy, what research strategy you would give an incoming freshman how to deal with this problem. And again, your paper's due, it's midnight, you're writing your paper, it's due the next morning at 9, it's got to be done or you're going to get a bad grade. What version of the truth do you go with? Maybe you go with the version of truth that lines up with your beliefs. Or maybe you go modern, maybe you go a good press. But it doesn't seem like the problem has a solution. So real time, being practical, what do you tell that freshman? Okay.